Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered where the years have gone? That moment when you realize life has moved forward relentlessly, while something inside feels strangely unfinished. For many men reaching their 40s, this experience becomes an unavoidable companion. The career advancement that once seemed so important now feels hollow. The relationships that should bring fulfillment somehow leave an emptiness that cannot be named. The spiritual practices that once provided comfort now seem rote and mechanical. It is as if you have climbed halfway up a mountain, only to discover you might be on the wrong peak altogether. This midlife crossroads is not just a modern phenomenon, but a profound spiritual juncture that men throughout history have faced. What if I told you that 5 centuries ago, a Spanish nobleman turned saint discovered a pathway through this very wilderness? What if the spiritual technology developed by Ignatius of Loyola contains precisely the tools needed for the modern man facing the second half of life? The crisis of meaning that haunts so many men at 40 is not a sign of failure, but potentially the doorway to the most authentic and purposeful chapter of your existence. The midlife transition that so many men experience around 40 is often misunderstood in our culture. We call it a crisis and treat it as a pathology, something to be medicated away or denied through desperate attempts to recapture youth. We see men buying sports cars, pursuing younger partners, or radically changing careers. But beneath these external symptoms lies a profound spiritual awakening that our materialistic society lacks the vocabulary to name. Ignatius of Loyola understood this juncture intimately because he lived it. As a Spanish nobleman and soldier, Ignatius had built his entire identity around worldly success, military prowess, and courtly romance. When a cannonball shattered his leg during the Battle of Pamplona in 1521, his forced convalescence initiated a profound interior revolution. At the age of 30, Ignatius found himself confronting questions that many men today only begin asking at 40. Who am I beyond my achievements? What is the purpose of my life? How do I discern the authentic call of God from the voices of ego, culture, and fear? During those months of physical recovery, Ignatius began noticing something that would become central to his spiritual approach. When he daydreamed about returning to his old life of military glory and romantic conquests, he would feel an immediate excitement, but later experience a lingering emptiness. Conversely, when he contemplated a life devoted to God, the initial feeling was more challenging, but a lasting peace would follow. This observation became the seed of what Ignatius would later develop as the discernment of spirits, one of the most powerful tools for navigating the complex interior landscape of midlife. For the man at 40 who feels simultaneously successful and empty, accomplished yet unfulfilled, Ignatius offers not an escape from reality, but a deeper engagement with it, a way of paying attention to the subtle movements of the soul that point toward authentic purpose. The modern world offers countless distractions from the discomfort of midlife questioning. Technology keeps us perpetually occupied. Consumer culture promises fulfillment through the next purchase, and achievement culture tells us that if we only work harder or smarter, the emptiness will subside. Yet these external solutions rarely address the core spiritual hunger that emerges at this life stage. They may temporarily numb the discomfort, but they cannot resolve the fundamental questions that arise. This is where the wisdom of Ignatius becomes particularly relevant. Instead of fleeing from discomfort through distraction or numbing, Ignatius invites us to move toward it with awareness and courage, recognizing in our very restlessness a divine invitation to transformation. The disquiet that many men experience at 40 is not a problem to solve, but a summons to a deeper way of being, a call that requires not anesthesia, but attention. This approach stands in stark contrast to our quick-fix culture, offering instead a patient engagement with the soul's deepest longings and most authentic questions. What emerges through this engagement is not a return to the uncomplicated certainties of youth, but a more nuanced, integrated relationship with self, others, and the divine, one capable of embracing both the light and shadow aspects of human experience. The experience of Ignatius resonates profoundly with what modern psychology calls individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are beyond societal expectations and conditioned patterns. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who deeply studied this midlife transition, noted that the first half of life is appropriately focused on establishing ourselves in the world, building careers, creating families, and developing competence. But around midlife, a new task emerges, one that requires a completely different set of skills and orientations. This second journey involves recovering neglected parts of ourselves, confronting our shadows, and discovering a deeper purpose that transcends external achievement. What makes the Ignatian approach so valuable for the modern man at 40 is that it predates these psychological insights by nearly 400 years, yet offers a practical, tested methodology for navigating this precise territory. When Ignatius developed his spiritual exercises following his conversion, he was essentially creating a program for spiritual transformation that addresses the exact challenges that emerge at midlife. The exercises begin with what Ignatius called the principle and foundation, a meditation on the purpose of human life that asks us to hold all created things in proper perspective, using them only insofar as they help us toward our true end of loving and serving God. For the 40-year-old man who has spent decades accumulating success, possessions, and status, this meditation offers a radical reorientation. It invites him to examine everything in his life and ask not, is this impressive or will this earn the approval of others, but rather, does this bring me closer to my authentic purpose? Does this choice align me with love? This is not about abandoning responsibility or success, but about finding a new relationship with them, one where they serve a deeper calling rather than defining our worth. I want to pause for a moment here and connect with you personally. Have you found yourself questioning the meaning of your achievements? That moment when you look at your life, your career, your relationships, and wonder if you've been building something authentic or simply following a script handed to you by society? This feeling of standing at a crossroads, part of you wanting to continue on the familiar path, while another part yearns for something more meaningful, is a sacred moment of possibility. Saint Ignatius experienced this profound turning point, and his life was never the same afterward. If this resonates with your experience, I invite you to share in the comments with the words, "I stand at the crossroads." Your willingness to acknowledge this threshold might be exactly what another viewer needs to recognize their own spiritual journey. Sometimes the most powerful step we can take is simply naming where we are, creating space for the divine to work within that honest recognition. In sharing your experience, you create a community of seekers supporting one another through this transformative passage that so many men face in silence and isolation. The spiritual crisis that often emerges around 40 carries a particular poignancy because it coincides with the height of external capability for many men. Unlike the crisis of adolescence, where uncertainty is expected and supported, or the challenges of old age, where existential questions seem natural, the midlife spiritual awakening often arrives when a man appears most established. He may have achieved professional success, raised children halfway to independence, and established his place in the world. From the outside, everything looks complete, which makes the internal emptiness all the more confusing and isolating. This is precisely where Ignatian spirituality offers its most profound insight. Ignatius teaches us that this emptiness is not a failure of achievement, but an invitation to transformation. The sense of something missing is not a mistake, but a summons. In his autobiography, dictated late in life to a fellow Jesuit, Ignatius recounts how after his conversion, he went to the sanctuary of Montserrat, where he placed his sword and dagger before the altar of the Black Madonna, exchanging his nobleman's clothes for the garment of a beggar. This dramatic external gesture symbolized an internal reality, the death of one identity and the birth of another. For the man at 40, a similarly profound transition is possible, though it rarely requires literally giving away all possessions. What Ignatius offers instead is a methodology for discerning which aspects of our established lives authentically serve our deepest purpose, and which have become empty husks, status symbols that drain rather than nourish the soul. Through what he called the exam, a daily practice of prayerful reflection, Ignatius provides a practical tool for paying attention to where true life is found and where we are simply going through motions dictated by habit or expectation. This practice involves reviewing the events of the day, noticing moments of connection and disconnection, consolation and desolation, and gradually developing the capacity to distinguish between what gives genuine life and what subtly diminishes it. For the 40-year-old man who has spent decades building a life according to external metrics of success, this practice offers a radically different measuring stick, one calibrated to the authentic movements of his own soul, rather than the approval of others or the accumulation of achievements. For the man facing midlife questions, one of the most powerful aspects of Ignatian spirituality is its grounding in concrete reality rather than abstract theology. Ignatius was not primarily a theoretician, but a practitioner who developed his spiritual approach through lived experience. His own journey began not with theological study, but with the practical question of how to make sense of the interior movements he was experiencing during his convalescence. This experiential foundation makes Ignatian spirituality particularly accessible to men who may feel alienated from traditional religious language or concepts, but who recognize in their own lived experience the stirrings of deeper questions and desires. Unlike approaches that begin with doctrinal statements or moral imperatives, Ignatius starts with experience, inviting the practitioner to pay attention to what is actually happening within. This attention itself becomes the doorway to transformation, as the man begins to notice patterns, attachments, and movements that previously operated below the threshold of awareness. From this foundation of attentive presence to experience, Ignatius then offers tools for discernment, ways of distinguishing between the various voices and impulses that shape our choices. This discernment capacity becomes particularly crucial at midlife, when the scripts that guided the first half of life no longer seem adequate for the complexity and depth of the questions that emerge. Ignatius teaches that genuine discernment requires not just rational analysis, but a holistic engagement that includes emotion, imagination, and bodily awareness, dimensions of experience that many professionally successful men have learned to subordinate or ignore in favor of strategic thinking and efficient action. The recovery of these neglected dimensions becomes a crucial aspect of midlife spiritual development, rounding out the partial self that achieved external success at the cost of internal integration. The theological underpinnings of Ignatian spirituality offer particularly rich resources for the man at midlife, because they directly address the core existential questions that emerge during this transition. At the heart of Ignatius's approach is what he called finding God in all things, a spirituality that refuses to separate the sacred from the ordinary. Unlike spiritual paths that recommend withdrawal from worldly engagement, Ignatius promotes what later Jesuits would call being contemplatives in action. This integration of deep spiritual awareness with active engagement in the world speaks directly to the dilemma many men face at 40, when they find themselves longing for more spiritual depth, but unable or unwilling to abandon their responsibilities and commitments. The Ignatian way offers not an either-or proposition, but a both-and possibility, a way of bringing contemplative depth to the very activities that previously felt empty or merely instrumental. Central to this integration is the Ignatian understanding of desire. While many spiritual traditions view desire with suspicion, as something to be transcended or overcome, Ignatius recognized in our deepest desires a divine communication. He believed that what we most authentically want, beneath the surface cravings conditioned by culture and ego, is actually a manifestation of God's desire for us and within us. This theological insight has profound implications for the man at 40, who finds himself questioning what he truly wants from the second half of life. Rather than seeing his restlessness as a problem to solve, the Ignatian perspective reframes it as a holy discontent, the stirring of deeper desires that have been neglected in the rush to build a successful life according to external standards. The spiritual task becomes not suppressing these emerging desires, but discerning which ones lead toward authentic fulfillment, and which are merely distractions or attempts to escape the necessary pain of growth. This discernment process is supported by Ignatius's nuanced understanding of consolation and desolation, interior movements that provide clues about which path leads toward our authentic purpose. True consolation, in the Ignatian sense, is not simply feeling good, but experiencing an increase in faith, hope, and love, while desolation involves a turning inward upon oneself and a diminishment of these theological virtues. Learning to distinguish these movements provides the midlife man with a spiritual compass for navigating the complex terrain of the second half of life. One of the most powerful theological concepts in Ignatian spirituality for the man at midlife is the understanding of kenosis, or self-emptying. Drawing on the Christological hymn in Philippians, which speaks of Christ emptying himself to take the form of a servant, Ignatius recognized that authentic spiritual growth often involves a letting go, rather than an accumulation. This perspective offers a profound reframing of the losses that frequently accompany midlife transition: the diminishment of physical strength, the realization of career limitations, the recognition of mortality. These can be experienced either as defeats to be denied through desperate grasping, or as invitations to a more essential identity, not dependent on external markers of success or virility. For the man who has invested heavily in achievement, control, and self-sufficiency, this invitation to kenosis represents both a significant challenge and a doorway to unexpected freedom. As he begins to loosen his grip on the constructed identity that has brought him success, but not fulfillment, he discovers the possibility of a more authentic way of being, one characterized not by relentless self-assertion, but by receptivity, gratitude, and interdependence. This spiritual reorientation does not diminish his engagement with the world, but transforms its quality, as action emerges not from the need to prove or secure his worth, but from genuine response to the needs and possibilities of each moment. The gradual surrender of the false self that Ignatius encourages is not a loss, but a recovery, a return to the authentic self that lies beneath the layers of conditioning, adaptation, and performance that have accumulated through decades of striving for success and approval. The practical spiritual methodology developed by Ignatius in his spiritual exercises offers specific tools that are remarkably suited to the challenges of midlife transition. Consider his approach to making a significant life decision, what he called an election. Ignatius outlines several modes of discernment, recognizing that divine guidance doesn't always arrive in the same way for everyone or in every situation. Sometimes clarity comes through a direct experience of God's presence, making the path forward unmistakable. But more often, particularly in midlife when questions become more nuanced and multifaceted, discernment requires a more deliberative process. For these situations, Ignatius offers practical exercises like imagining oneself on one's deathbed looking back at the decision, or standing before God at the final judgment. These exercises help cut through the noise of immediate concerns and surface-level considerations, bringing into focus what truly matters. For the man at 40, contemplating changes in his career, relationships, or spiritual practice, these methods provide a framework for decision-making that honors both practical realities and deeper values. Another key element of Ignatian practice particularly relevant to midlife is his emphasis on imaginative prayer. Rather than approaching Scripture as a text to be analyzed, Ignatius invites the prayer to enter the biblical scene through imagination, becoming an active participant in the narrative. This engagement of the imagination activates parts of the self that may have been neglected during years focused on rational analysis and practical achievement. For many men at midlife, whose professional success has often come through logical thinking and strategic planning, this imaginative approach can unlock doorways to parts of themselves that have remained undeveloped. It allows for a reconnection with emotion, intuition, and spiritual sensitivity that may have been sacrificed on the altar of competence and control. Perhaps most significantly for the man at 40 who feels caught between the identity he has built and the deeper self emerging from within, Ignatius offers the meditation on the two standards. In this exercise, the retreatant is asked to imagine two armies, one led by Christ and one by the enemy of human nature, each calling for allegiance. The strategy of the enemy, Ignatius explains, typically involves a progression. First, the temptation to riches, then to honor, and finally to pride, which becomes the gateway to all other vices. This progression precisely maps the journey many successful men have unknowingly followed, gradually becoming entrapped in a value system centered on wealth, status, and self-sufficiency that ultimately leaves them spiritually impoverished. The alternative standard of Christ, characterized by spiritual poverty, openness to being misunderstood or even rejected, and genuine humility, offers a radical but liberating reorientation for the second half of life. The richness of Ignatian spirituality for the man at midlife lies not just in its practical tools, but in its comprehensive vision of human flourishing. Unlike secular approaches to midlife transition that focus primarily on individual fulfillment or achievement of personal potential, Ignatius locates human fulfillment within a larger story of divine purpose and relationship. This broader framework provides a crucial counterbalance to the potential narcissism of midlife questioning, redirecting existential concerns away from self-absorption and toward meaningful participation in a larger reality. The Ignatian vision is neither self-denying in a way that suppresses authentic development, nor self-centered in a way that makes personal fulfillment the ultimate aim. Instead, it offers what we might call a God-centered humanism, an approach that values authentic human flourishing precisely as an expression of divine intention and gift. This perspective transforms the fundamental questions of midlife from, how can I be happy? Or what do I really want? to how am I being called to love? And what does God desire to bring about through my unique gifts and circumstances? This reframing doesn't diminish the importance of personal fulfillment, but locates it within a more capacious understanding of purpose, one that integrates individual flourishing with contribution to the common good. For the man at 40 who has achieved external success but feels an interior emptiness, this expansion of horizon offers a way beyond both the limitations of conventional achievement and the potential dead end of purely self-referential seeking. It opens the possibility of a second half of life, characterized not by decline or desperate grasping, but by deepening wisdom, expanding compassion, and more authentic contribution. The pivotal experiences in Ignatius's own life offer powerful parallels to the midlife transition many men face today. After his conversion, Ignatius spent nearly a year in the small town of Manresa, living in a cave outside the city where he engaged in intensive prayer, fasting, and spiritual exercises. During this time, he experienced dramatic oscillations between spiritual consolation and desolation, times of profound insight followed by periods of despair and confusion. At one point, he was so tormented by scruples and excessive concern about having sinned that he considered suicide. What carried him through this dark night was a gradual development of spiritual discernment, learning to recognize the different interior movements and their sources. For the man at 40 experiencing his own version of this passage, Ignatius's journey offers both comfort and guidance. The confusion, the questioning of previously held certainties, the alternation between exhilaration about new possibilities and terror about what might be lost, these are not signs of failure, but necessary components of authentic transformation. Just as Ignatius emerged from his time in Manresa with a clearer sense of his mission, the midlife man can emerge from his spiritual crucible with a more authentic vocation for the second half of life. This emergence doesn't always look like a dramatic external change. After establishing the Society of Jesus, Ignatius spent the last 16 years of his life primarily in Rome, handling correspondence and administrative tasks for the rapidly growing Jesuit order. What transformed was not primarily his external activities, but the spirit with which he engaged them, the clear intentionality and spiritual depth he brought to seemingly mundane tasks. Similarly, for many men at 40, the transformation called for isn't necessarily a radical change of career or lifestyle, but a fundamental shift in orientation, bringing renewed purpose and spiritual awareness to existing roles and responsibilities. As Ignatius famously instructed Jesuits engaged in active ministry, be contemplatives in action. This integration of deep spiritual awareness with full engagement in the world offers a compelling vision for the man seeking to bring greater meaning to his established life, rather than abandoning it entirely for some idealized spiritual alternative. The modern man facing midlife questions lives in a world radically different from that of 16th century Spain. Yet the core dynamics of spiritual transformation remain remarkably consistent across the centuries. Just as Ignatius found himself caught between the values of Renaissance courtly culture and the emerging call to a different way of being, today's man at 40 often finds himself caught between the values of consumer capitalism, success, autonomy, material comfort, and the deeper stirrings of soul that call for a more authentic engagement with life. The specific form of the tension may have changed, but its essential nature remains the same. A confrontation between the constructed identity that has brought a measure of worldly success and the emerging authentic self that seeks expression. What makes Ignatius such a valuable guide for navigating this tension is his pragmatic spirituality. His recognition that transformation happens not through withdrawal from the complexities of life, but through engaged discernment within them. Unlike spiritual approaches that emphasize transcendence of worldly concerns, Ignatius offers a path of transformation through rather than escape from the concrete circumstances of our lives. This engaged spirituality speaks directly to the situation of the midlife man who cannot and often does not wish to abandon his responsibilities and commitments, but seeks to bring greater depth and meaning to them. The Ignatian path does not ask him to choose between spiritual development and worldly engagement, but offers a way of integrating them, finding in the very activities and relationships that constitute his daily life opportunities for deeper authenticity and purpose. This integration doesn't happen automatically, of course. It requires the kind of attentive practice that Ignatius outlined in his spiritual exercises, a consistent turning toward rather than away from the actual experiences and interior movements that comprise our lived reality. But for the man willing to engage this practice, The second half of life holds the possibility not of diminishment, but of a profound deepening, a more authentic expression of who he is and what he is called to contribute. What might the application of Ignatian principles look like in the daily life of a 40-year-old man navigating this critical transition? The central Ignatian practice of the exam offers a place to start. This daily reflection, typically done for 15 minutes at the end of the day, involves reviewing the day's events with an eye toward recognizing God's presence and activity. It includes giving thanks for specific gifts received, reviewing the day's activities while noticing emotional responses, focusing on one particular aspect of the day for deeper reflection, looking toward tomorrow, and concluding with resolution and hope. This simple but profound practice gradually develops what we might call spiritual literacy, the ability to read the movements of one's own soul and discern the subtle invitations toward greater authenticity and purpose. For the man accustomed to evaluating his day based on productivity or achievement, the exam offers a radically different metric, focusing attention on moments of genuine connection, instances of giving and receiving love, and opportunities for service that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Another practical application involves bringing Ignatian discernment to significant life choices, whether about career transitions, relationship commitments, or use of resources. Rather than making decisions based primarily on financial considerations or status implications, Ignatian discernment invites a deeper questioning. Which option brings a sense of expanded freedom rather than constraint? Which path seems to offer the possibility for loving more deeply and authentically? Which choice, when imagined concretely, brings a settled peace beneath initial fears or excitements? These discernment questions don't replace practical considerations, but complement them, ensuring that major life decisions align with our deepest values, rather than merely advancing external measures of success. Perhaps most challenging and transformative is the Ignatian invitation to detachment, what he called indifference, not in the sense of not caring, but in the sense of not being unduly attached to any particular outcome other than God's will. For the man who has built his identity around control and achievement, this surrender represents a profound spiritual challenge. Yet, paradoxically, it also offers the key to the freedom he most deeply seeks: liberation from the exhausting effort to secure his worth through performance or possession. As Ignatius expressed in his famous prayer of surrender, the Suscipe, "Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all that I have and possess. You have given all to me. To you, O Lord, I return it. All is yours. Dispose of it wholly according to your will. Give me only your love and your grace, for this is sufficient for me." Beyond these specific practices, Ignatian spirituality invites a fundamental reorientation of awareness that has profound implications for daily life. The core Ignatian principle of finding God in all things encourages an attentiveness to the sacred dimension of ordinary experience, a recognition that every moment and interaction holds the potential for divine encounter. For the man at 40 whose spiritual life may have become compartmentalized, limited to occasional religious services or perfunctory prayers, this perspective offers a radical expansion of the spiritual domain. No longer confined to explicitly religious settings or activities, spiritual awareness becomes available within the board meeting, the family dinner, the morning commute, the evening walk. This expanded field of spiritual awareness doesn't require dramatic changes to external routines, but a subtle yet profound shift in how those routines are experienced. The conversation with a colleague becomes an opportunity for authentic connection rather than strategic positioning. The challenge of a difficult project becomes an invitation to creative contribution rather than merely a hurdle to overcome. The limitation of a physical ailment becomes a doorway to deeper compassion rather than merely an obstacle to productivity. This reorientation doesn't happen all at once, of course. It unfolds gradually through consistent practice and patient attention to the actual texture of experience, rather than our habitual interpretations of it. But as this capacity for presence develops, the man discovers that the very circumstances that previously felt empty or constraining now reveal unexpected depth and meaning. The midlife hunger for something more begins to be satisfied, not through the acquisition of new experiences or achievements, but through a transformed relationship with the life he already has. This is not a resignation to limitations, but a discovery of the sacred dimensions of ordinary reality, dimensions that have always been present but that our achievement-oriented consciousness has been trained to overlook in its relentless focus on the next goal or acquisition. Many men approaching 40 find themselves in a spiritual wasteland, disconnected from authentic religious experience, despite perhaps maintaining external religious observance. They may attend church or other religious services out of habit or family expectation, but the rituals that once perhaps held meaning have become empty routines. The prayers they recite feel like words without power, disconnected from their daily reality and deepest concerns. This religious disenchantment often coincides with the broader midlife questioning, as the man begins to recognize the gap between the external trappings of his life and his internal experience. Here again, Ignatian spirituality offers a revitalizing alternative to both mindless religious conformity and wholesale abandonment of spiritual practice. Ignatius does not call for more religious activities, but for a transformed way of experiencing all activities. His spirituality centers not on escaping the world for some purified religious realm, but on finding the sacred within the ordinary. This approach speaks directly to the 40-year-old man who senses that somewhere beneath the accumulated layers of religious formality and professional competence lies a more authentic relationship with the divine, one that integrates rather than compartmentalizes his spiritual life. The Ignatian practice of contemplation and action models a spirituality robust enough for the complexities of midlife, neither retreating into otherworldly piety nor surrendering to cynical materialism. Through practices like the exam, imaginative prayer, and discernment of spirits, the midlife man can begin to recover a sense of God's presence, not as a distant authority figure, but as the ground of being in which all of life unfolds, the source of the very restlessness that signals the need for change. This recovery doesn't necessarily require dramatic alterations to external religious practice, though some changes may naturally emerge. Rather, it involves bringing a new quality of attention and intention to existing activities, gradually transforming them from empty obligations to authentic expressions of a renewed spiritual identity. As Ignatius himself discovered during his convalescence, the same religious text that had previously held little interest can suddenly become alive with meaning when approached with genuine openness and hunger for transformation. For men raised in religious traditions that emphasize obedience to external authority and adherence to moral rules, the midlife spiritual awakening often involves a painful recognition that this approach no longer adequately addresses the complexity of their lived experience. The religious frameworks that provided clear guidance in childhood and early adulthood may seem increasingly inadequate for navigating the nuanced ethical dilemmas and existential questions that emerge at midlife. This recognition sometimes leads to a wholesale rejection of religious practice, as the man concludes that the spiritual path itself, rather than his particular relationship to it, has reached its limits. The Ignatian approach offers a compelling alternative to both uncritical religious conformity and complete abandonment of spiritual practice. Ignatius recognized that authentic spiritual maturity involves a transition from reliance on external authority to an internalized moral compass, from following rules to discerning principles in specific situations. His spiritual exercises aim not at producing perfect adherence to religious formulas, but at developing the capacity for discernment, the ability to recognize and respond to divine invitation within the complexities of actual life. This developmental approach to spirituality speaks directly to the midlife man who finds himself caught between the religious certainties of his past and the emerging questions that no longer fit within those frameworks. It offers him not a new set of answers to memorize, but a methodology for engaging the questions themselves with greater awareness and discernment. This shift from a spirituality of answers to a spirituality of questioning represents a crucial transition in faith development, one that aligns with the broader developmental tasks of midlife. As the man learns to trust his own spiritual experience and discernment, he discovers not the collapse of meaningful spiritual life, but its expansion and deepening, a faith robust enough to embrace both certainty and doubt, clarity and mystery, tradition and innovation. One of the most powerful aspects of Ignatian spirituality for the midlife man is its embrace of desire as a pathway to God, rather than an obstacle. Unlike spiritual approaches that emphasize the suppression or transcendence of desire, Ignatius recognized in our deepest longings a divine communication, what he called the magis, the more that God is always inviting us toward. This perspective offers profound liberation for the 40-year-old man who finds himself caught between the culturally approved desires that have shaped the first half of life achievements: recognition, security, comfort, and emerging desires that seem to have no clear place or purpose within that established framework. Rather than seeing this tension as a problem to solve, the Ignatian approach reframes it as a holy discomfort, the growing edge where God is calling him toward greater authenticity and deeper purpose. In the spiritual exercises, Ignatius repeatedly encourages the retreatant to ask for what they desire in prayer. This simple instruction carries radical implications, inviting us to move beyond prescribed religious formulas to articulate our actual longings before God. For many men at midlife, constrained by decades of meeting expectations and fulfilling responsibilities, the simple question, "What do you want?" can trigger profound disorientation. They have become so accustomed to responding to external demands that their own authentic desires have become muted or inaccessible. The patient, attentive listening to emerging desires that Ignatian spirituality encourages, becomes a crucial pathway for reconnecting with buried aspects of the self that seek expression in the second half of life. Yet Ignatius also provides guidance for discerning which desires lead toward genuine fulfillment, and which represent merely temporary distractions or attempts to escape the necessary challenges of growth. His rules for discernment of spirits offer practical wisdom for distinguishing between the voice of the authentic self, aligned with divine purpose, and the voices of fear, cultural conditioning, or ego attachment. This discernment becomes particularly crucial at midlife when the temptation to resolve discomfort through impulsive external changes, career shifts, relationship exits, or geography changes can be strong. The Ignatian approach invites a more patient and nuanced response, distinguishing between the superficial desires that temporarily ease discomfort and the deeper desires that may initially increase tension, but ultimately lead toward more authentic and purposeful living. If these reflections on Saint Ignatius's approach to midlife transformation have touched something in your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where we explore together the path toward a deeper and more authentic faith. Each week we share teachings inspired by the lives of the saints to transform our spiritual life and draw closer to God. The journey of midlife spiritual awakening doesn't need to be walked alone. Many of us are trying to navigate this profound transition with greater awareness and purpose. Thank you for sharing this moment of reflection. Your presence here is already a sign of grace at work in your life. The journey of midlife transformation that we've been exploring through the lens of Ignatian spirituality is not merely about personal fulfillment or individual well-being, though it certainly includes these dimensions. For Ignatius, the ultimate purpose of spiritual growth was always service, what he called helping souls. The very name he chose for his religious order, the Society of Jesus, reflected this fundamentally relational and outward-oriented spirituality. This perspective offers a powerful corrective to the potential narcissism of midlife questioning, redirecting the existential search not toward greater self-absorption, but toward more authentic service and contribution. For the 40-year-old man who has achieved external success but feels an interior emptiness, this orientation toward service provides a crucial pathway forward. The question shifts from what is missing from my life to how am I being called to serve in a more authentic way. This shift doesn't deny the legitimacy of personal fulfillment, but recognizes that such fulfillment emerges most powerfully as a byproduct of self-transcending purpose rather than direct pursuit of happiness or satisfaction. In the spiritual exercises, Ignatius leads the retreatant through a series of meditations on the life of Christ, culminating in what he calls the contemplation to attain love. This exercise invites reflection on how God loves us through constant giving the gift of creation, the gift of redemption, the gift of personal talents and qualities, and the gift of God's own self. The natural response to recognizing this divine generosity is a desire to return love for love through one's own generous giving. For the man at midlife who has spent decades building his security and establishing his identity, this invitation to generosity requires a profound reorientation. It challenges the scarcity mentality that often underlies achievement-oriented living, the sense that there is never quite enough success, recognition, or security to feel truly safe. In place of this constricted way of being, Ignatian spirituality offers an expansive vision of abundance. Not primarily material abundance, though Ignatius wasn't opposed to prosperity when it served genuine good, but an abundance of love, purpose, and meaning available precisely through the act of generous giving. This reorientation towards service doesn't necessarily require dramatic external changes. Many men at midlife imagine that resolving their existential questions requires abandoning their established careers for more explicitly helping professions or volunteer roles. While such changes are sometimes appropriate, the Ignatian vision suggests that transformation more often involves bringing a new quality of presence and purpose to existing roles and responsibilities. The business executive, the attorney, the technologist, the tradesman, each has unique opportunities for service within their established field, possibilities that may have gone unrecognized when career was viewed primarily through the lens of achievement or advancement rather than contribution. The transformation of purpose that Ignatian spirituality encourages goes beyond simply adding charitable activities to an otherwise unchanged life. It involves a fundamental reorientation from self-advancement to contribution, from accumulation to generative giving. This shift aligns with what developmental psychologists like Erik Erikson identified as the central task of middle adulthood: generativity versus stagnation. The man who successfully navigates this stage discovers ways to contribute to the well-being of future generations, whether through parenting, mentoring, creative work, or community engagement. Those who fail to make this transition risk becoming trapped in stagnation, a state characterized by self-absorption and a progressive narrowing of concern and engagement. The Ignatian emphasis on service as the natural expression of authentic spirituality provides a framework for understanding and embracing this developmental transition, not as an abandonment of personal fulfillment, but as its deepest realization. This perspective transforms the very meaning of success from something measured primarily by personal achievement or acquisition to something evaluated in terms of contribution and positive impact. For the 40-year-old man who has spent decades climbing ladders of success defined by external metrics, this reorientation offers both challenge and liberation. It challenges the ego structures that have been built around achievement and recognition, while simultaneously liberating him from the exhausting effort to secure his worth through performance or possession. The gradual discovery that fulfillment comes not from getting, but from giving, not from being recognized, but from making a difference, represents one of the most profound gifts of the midlife transition, transforming what initially feels like a crisis of meaning into an opportunity for more authentic and generative living. As we consider the implications of Ignatian spirituality for the man at 40, we must acknowledge that midlife transformation rarely follows a neat, linear path. The journey from the achievement-oriented identity of the first half of life to the more integrated and purposeful identity of the second half typically involves periods of confusion, resistance, and setback, interspersed with moments of insight, release, and breakthrough. Ignatius himself experienced this uneven process in his own spiritual journey, moving through periods of intense illumination, followed by times of darkness and desolation. What sustained him through these oscillations was not the elimination of difficulty, but the development of a framework for understanding and navigating it. His rules for the discernment of spirits, which provide guidance for distinguishing between different interior movements and their sources, offer the midlife man a similar framework for making sense of his own complex and often contradictory experiences. The path of transformation doesn't promise the absence of confusion or struggle, but the capacity to engage these experiences with greater awareness and purpose, recognizing in them not merely obstacles to overcome, but potential doorways to deeper authenticity and wisdom. This nuanced understanding of the spiritual journey offers a crucial alternative to both naive optimism, which expects transformation to proceed smoothly without significant challenge, and cynical resignation, which sees the discomforts of midlife as merely symptoms of decline to be endured, rather than invitations to growth. The Ignatian approach acknowledges the genuine difficulties of transformation, while simultaneously affirming the deeper purpose unfolding through them, providing both realistic expectations and sustaining hope for the man navigating the complexities of midlife transition. As we consider the practical implications of Ignatian spirituality for the man at 40, we find a remarkable relevance to contemporary challenges, despite the centuries separating us from Ignatius's time. The fragmentation that characterizes modern life, with its rigid separation between professional and personal spheres, between public achievement and private fulfillment, between intellectual knowledge and embodied wisdom, creates precisely the conditions for the midlife crisis that so many men experience. What Ignatius offers is not a retreat from these complexities, but a path of integration, a way of bringing the whole self-career, relationships, body, mind, and spirit into alignment with authentic purpose. This integration begins with the practice of attention, what Ignatius called awareness or consciousness. Before we can transform our relationship with the various aspects of our lives, we must first become aware of them as they actually are, not as we wish them to be or fear them to be. The exam provides a daily structure for developing this quality of attention, gradually expanding our capacity to notice not only external events, but also internal movements, the subtle emotions, bodily sensations, recurring thoughts, and spiritual intuitions that comprise our lived experience. For the 40-year-old man whose professional success has often come through a narrowing of attention, focusing on specific goals while filtering out distractions, this practice of expanded awareness can initially feel threatening, as it brings into view neglected aspects of experience that don't fit neatly into the achievement-oriented narrative of the first half of life. Yet this expanded attention also opens doorways to the very integration he most deeply seeks. As he becomes more attuned to the interior movements that Ignatius calls consolation and desolation, he develops what we might call spiritual intelligence, the ability to discern which choices, relationships, and activities bring genuine life and which subtly diminish it. This discernment capacity becomes increasingly crucial in the second half of life, as the external markers of success that previously guided decision-making prove insufficient for navigating the more nuanced questions that emerge. Not just what can I achieve, but what truly matters. Not just what can I control, but what must I surrender. Not just what will earn approval, but what expresses my authentic contribution. In our exploration of Ignatian spirituality as a pathway through midlife transition, we've emphasized the interior dimensions of transformation, the changes in perspective, awareness, and orientation that characterize authentic spiritual development. But Ignatius was also deeply concerned with the concrete expression of these interior changes in tangible action and relationship. For him, spiritual growth was not complete until it manifested in what he called the service of faith and the promotion of justice, a commitment to expressing love not merely through feeling or intention, but through practical action that contributes to the well-being of others, especially those most vulnerable or marginalized. This integration of contemplation and action, of interior transformation and external engagement, offers a compelling vision for the 40-year-old man seeking not escape from his established responsibilities, but a more authentic and purposeful way of fulfilling them. The very commitments that might initially seem like obstacles to spiritual development, career demands, family responsibilities, community obligations become, in the Ignatian vision, the primary arena for living out the deepening authenticity and purpose that emerge through spiritual practice. This perspective transforms the meaning of these commitments from burdens that constrain spiritual growth to opportunities for its expression, from distractions from the spiritual path to its concrete embodiment. The business executive discovers that his leadership role offers unique possibilities for fostering more human and just organizational cultures. The father recognizes that his parenting provides opportunities for modeling and nurturing authentic values in the next generation. The community member finds in his local involvements chances to contribute to the common good in ways aligned with his deepest values. This integration of contemplation and action doesn't resolve all the tensions and challenges of midlife, of course. The man at 40 still faces difficult choices about how to allocate limited time and energy among competing demands. But the Ignatian vision offers a framework for approaching these choices not as zero-sum trade-offs between spiritual development and worldly responsibility, but as opportunities for discerning where and how his unique gifts can best contribute to meaningful purpose. As we draw our exploration of Ignatian spirituality and midlife transformation toward a conclusion, it's worth considering how this approach differs from other popular responses to the challenges of midlife. Our contemporary culture often treats the midlife crisis as either a pathology to be medicated, a temporary aberration to be endured, or an opportunity for superficial reinvention through consumption or novelty seeking. What Ignatius offers is a radically different framework, one that honors the profound existential questions that emerge at this juncture as not only normal, but sacred, doorways to the most authentic chapter of a man's life, rather than problems to be solved or distractions to be overcome. This perspective transforms the very meaning of the midlife transition from crisis to opportunity, from breakdown to breakthrough. The disorientation, restlessness, and questioning that characterize this passage become not symptoms of failure, but invitations to a deeper, more integrated way of being in the world. The Ignatian path through this transition is neither a retreat from engagement with the world nor a doubling down on the achievement patterns of the first half of life. It offers instead a middle way that might be described as contemplative action, bringing a new quality of presence, discernment, and purpose to our engagement with career, relationships, and community. For the 40-year-old man who feels simultaneously successful and empty, this integration offers the possibility of healing the fragmentation that so often characterizes modern life. The compartmentalization that may have seemed necessary for achievement in the first half of life, separating professional from personal, intellectual from emotional, public from private, begins to dissolve as he discovers a more unified way of being. This integration doesn't happen all at once, of course. As Ignatius discovered in his own spiritual journey, transformation unfolds gradually through consistent practice and patient attention to the movements of the soul. The daily exam, regular periods of reflective solitude, imaginative engagement with Scripture, and ongoing discernment of the spirits at work in our lives, these disciplines slowly reshape not just what we do, but who we are and how we experience our place in the world. What emerges through this process is not a perfect life, free from struggle or limitation, but a more authentic one, characterized by what Ignatius called spiritual freedom, the capacity to respond to each situation from our deepest values, rather than from compulsion, fear, or the need for approval. For this freedom becomes particularly precious in the second half of life, as the man faces not only continued external challenges, but also the existential realities of aging, physical limitation, and mortality. The Ignatian path offers not an escape from these realities, but a way of engaging them with dignity, purpose, and even joy. Recognizing in the very constraints and vulnerabilities of the human condition an invitation to more authentic connection with self, others, and the divine. The story of Ignatius himself offers a final, powerful testimony to the transformative journey available to men at midlife. Ignatius was 30 when his life took its dramatic turn, but the decades that followed were not a straight path of spiritual ascent. He experienced periods of intense mystical illumination, followed by times of darkness and confusion. He pursued academic credentials in his 40s, sitting in classrooms with students half his age, enduring the humiliation of remedial Latin studies, because he recognized the need for theological training to support his emerging mission. He faced opposition from religious authorities, suspicious of his methods and message, was imprisoned by the Inquisition, and navigated complex political realities as he established and led the rapidly growing Society of Jesus. Through all these challenges, what characterized his journey was not perfection, but perseverance. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of purpose. Not the elimination of weakness, but its transformation into a source of compassion and wisdom. This pattern offers profound encouragement for the 40-year-old man standing at his own crossroads. The path forward will not be without confusion, setback, or struggle. The questions that emerge at midlife don't yield to quick or simple answers. The integration of the disparate aspects of identity into a more authentic whole happens gradually, often with 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Yet through this uneven process, something remarkable becomes possible. A second half of life characterized not by decline, but by deepening. Not by narrowing options, but by greater freedom. Not by resignation, but by purpose. As Ignatius discovered in his own journey, what initially appears as loss, even catastrophic loss, the loss of identity, capability, or certainty, can become the gateway to unimagined gifts. The cannonball that shattered his leg and ended his military career opened the door to a vocation of immeasurably greater impact and meaning. Similarly, for the man at 40, what initially feels like a devastating loss of certainty or identity can become the necessary clearing for a more authentic and purposeful life to emerge. This emergence doesn't happen automatically, of course. It requires the courage to face difficult questions, the humility to acknowledge limitations, the patience to endure periods of disorientation, and the commitment to practices that gradually reshape our way of being in the world. But for those willing to engage this journey with intention and openness, the second half of life holds possibilities for meaning, purpose, and joy that far exceed what our achievement-oriented culture typically imagines. As Ignatius himself might remind us, the God who calls us toward this transformation is already at work within the very restlessness that signals the need for change. Our task is not to create transformation through our own effort, but to cooperate with the divine invitation already present in our deepest desires and most honest questions. The discomfort of midlife transition, viewed through this lens, becomes not an obstacle to overcome, but a divine communication to be heeded. The growing edge where new life awaits. In the words of Ignatius's famous prayer, "May it please the supreme and divine goodness to give us all abundant grace ever to know His most holy will, and perfectly to fulfill it." If you found value in these reflections on the Ignatian path through midlife transformation, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might benefit from this perspective. The journey we've explored today remains largely unacknowledged in our culture, leaving many men to navigate this profound transition without the language or tools to understand what they're experiencing. Your simple act of liking and sharing could help someone recognize their own experience in these words and discover a pathway forward. And if this approach to integrating spiritual wisdom with the concrete challenges of modern life speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where we'll continue exploring how the treasures of the Christian spiritual tradition can illuminate and transform our everyday experience. Thank you for your presence and attention. May you discover in your own life, whatever stage you find yourself in, the sacred invitation hidden within your deepest questions and most authentic desires. Remember that what appears as crisis may actually be the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of your life, if approached with courage, discernment, and openness to transformation. As Ignatius discovered through his own journey from worldly nobleman to spiritual guide for countless souls across the centuries, our wounds and limitations often become, through grace, the very gateways to our most authentic contribution. The cannonball that shatters our carefully constructed identity may be the divine instrument that clears the way for a more genuine and purposeful life to emerge. Go forward with hope, knowing that the God who stirred these questions within you is already at work bringing about the transformation they seek to express.